Good morning. Hi, this is Dave Clarke. And this is the ongoing series about my family members and friends and relatives, shipmates, people who have donated and who have contributed substantially to me as a person. And today I want to talk more about the family, okay? This is not me, really. I think you knew that all along anyway. But today I want to talk about my grandparents, specifically my grandmother. And in talking about my grandmother and my grandparents, I cannot do so without a salute to diversity. Now, because nature is my church, I usually like to use pictures from nature to depict what I'm talking about. So while I'm talking, you're going to be looking at some pictures of some flowers, okay? But before that happens, I wanted to introduce you to my grandmother. If you're looking at this video, she is the one on the right. To all of us, we call her Aunt Keziah. Her name, maiden name, was Milne. And, believe it or not, her stock is Ibu and Scotland. On one hand, she was the product of Maroons in Jamaica. That's right. And on the other hand, she's the product of Milne, the Scottish family. Yep, Winnie the Pooh. Now you recognize the name, right? So you have the Milne, Scottish family, and you have the Ibu, the Maroons of Jamaica, and that is my grandmother. She was a tall, stately woman, beautiful woman, and she would tell me, now you got to remember, my grandmother died while I was in the Navy. And when I say grandmother, I'm talking about my father's mother. Now, I have shown you pictures of my father earlier. So, she died while I was in the Navy. But her children loved her to death. Pardon the choice of words. But they adored her. As a matter of fact, my Aunt Norma would think of her as someone who actually walked on water. I don't have a lot of memory of Aunt Kiz, really. I just remember that she was a storyteller. And as a very, very young boy, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old maybe, I remember that when she told stories, I would just gaze at her in awe. Do I remember any of her stories? No, I do not. I just remember her as the stately figure telling stories as a grandmother would to her grandchild. One story she told me was the story about her coming home from going to the dentist. Now, we lived in Mandeville at the time, Mandeville, Jamaica at the time. And people would walk. Aunt Kiz would walk. So she was walking home from the dentist, and she had to go by the yard of a man by the name of Pat Delapeno. Now, Pat was a good friend of my Aunt Nez, the family, you may say, because Aunt Nez, Aunt Kiz's daughter, was very much into building homes. In Mandeville, she had a home that she called Casa Verde. and it was built next to a golf course. As a matter of fact, my first introduction to golf was in Mandeville, and because the house she built was called Casa Verde, across the street from a golf course. Anyway, so Aunt Kiz is walking home from the I'm laughing about this story. Aunt Kiz is walking home from the dentist, and she goes by Pat de la Pena's house. Now, Pat de la Pena was a very wealthy man who lived in Jamaica. So Pat de la Pena was a man who was very wealthy, and at his house on a very slight hill, he had these beautiful gardens all over his property. And he also kept very exotic animals. So anyway, my grandmother was walking by his house, and she saw the peacocks, of course, and she would admire the peacocks at Pat de la Pena's house. But on the fence was a little monkey, and Aunt Kiz was walking down the street, and as she walked, the monkey would go to the next post, looking at her. And as she walked, the monkey would go to the next post, looking at her. And Aunt Kiz said, yeah, this monkey kept following her as she walked by Pat de la Pena's house, and she was afraid. Oh, gosh. See, Aunt Kiz was never afraid to express her emotions. Thanks to Aunt Kiz, she had something like 13 children, by the way, for her husband in the picture I just showed you. And these children all turned out to be successful. So, I wanted you to know about diversity. My father's mother, my father's parents, as a matter of fact, and diversity. So when you grow up in a family when diversity is paramount, it is normal. Normal. The next time we talk, I will tell you about my father's father and his family. That goes back to 1640. Fascinating family.